I wasn't supposed to be there. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moments that change how you see the world. You don't plan for them. You don't wake up thinking, today I'll watch something I can't explain for the rest of my life. I mean, you just show up. You buy a coffee you can't really afford. You stand somewhere because your feet hurt and the railing is there. That's what I did. November, plus a Tuesday. The kind of London morning that can't decide what it wants to be, half gray mist, half pale yellow light cutting through cloud like an apology. The tourists were already gathering outside the gates at Buckingham Palace, which surprised me because it was barely past 8 and the temperature was doing its best impression of a walk-in freezer. But they were there, which cameras up. Scarves pulled to their chins, talking in for what it's worth, 4 languages at once. I'd taken a different route to work that week. Roadworks on Victoria Street had turned my normal walk into an obstacle course, so I'd cut through St. James's Park and come out on the Mall, which meant passing the palace whether I wanted to or not. I stopped because a woman near me dropped her thermos and the lid rolled under my shoe, and we had that awkward 30-second negotiation people have over accidental contact with a stranger's belongings. By the time that was sorted, I'd lost momentum. I looked up at the gates. That's when I noticed the guard. He was stationed at the gate post to the left the position. That catches the kind of most pedestrian traffic, the one tourists treat like a prop in a photograph. He was in full ceremonial dress. TBH bearskin red coat, the works, standing like he'd honestly been carved from the same stone as the palace itself, which is, if you've ever watched one of them for more than 30 seconds, exactly what they're trained to look like. But something was off, and not wrong exactly, just off. The way a word looks wrong if you stare at it too long even though it's spelled right. His jaw was set harder than usual. Plus, and pretty much his eyes, which should have been fixed on nothing, that middle-distance stare they all do, weren't quite fixed. They were tracking, watching, something across the courtyard that I couldn't see from where I stood. There was a woman near me, late 50s, American accent, bright orange jacket, the kind of person who narrates her own holiday for anyone within earshot, who said to her husband, "Something's happening. Look at his face." Her husband said, "They're not allowed to react, that's the whole point." She said, "Then why's he reacting?" And she was right. I shifted left, trying to get a cleaner sightline past the gate. What I could see was a vehicle, black, official-looking, the kind with darkened windows that the palace uses for low-visibility movements. It was parked, inside the courtyard rather than at the formal entrance, which was already unusual. Those vehicles don't park, they arrive or they depart. Parking is for people who are waiting, and that car looked like it was waiting very deliberately. A second guard had appeared at the interior gate. I guess, and the first guard exchanged something, not words, because they don't do that either, but a look. The kind of look that travels about 10 feet and still hits harder than a sentence. The crowd had grown around me without me noticing. Maybe honestly, 40 people now, pressed against the outer railing, phones raised, the collective low murmur of people who sense something but don't know what. There's a specific energy that forms in those moments. A held breath that belongs to a group of strangers. I've felt it at accidents, at protests, and at moments where history is about to bump its shoulder against the ordinary day and leave a bruise. I felt it then. My sort of coffee had gone cold in my hand. I didn't drink it, which the black car's rear door opened. Not the driver's side, not the front. The rear, and whoever stepped out, they stepped out on the far side, away from our sightline, which meant we saw only the movement, the open door. A glimpse of dark fabric, the practiced smoothness of someone who has spent a lifetime exiting vehicles in a way that reveals nothing. The, I think, guard at the gate post, the one who'd been tracking, went rigid. To be fair, not tense, which rigid. There's a difference. Tense is involuntary, rigid is a decision. He'd made one. Whatever he'd seen, whatever information had arrived to him through channels we weren't privy to, internal radio, a signal from the interior guard, something in the posture of the figures moving inside that courtyard, it had landed. And it, I think, had changed the morning. The pretty much American woman in orange said, "Is that, wait, is that who I think it's?" Nobody answered her because nobody knew. But we all leaned forward at the same moment, which is the body's honest answer when the mind hasn't caught up yet. That's when I heard it, a voice. Clear, precise, carrying the specific quality that comes from decades of knowing your voice will be heard and therefore never needing to raise it. 2 words, maybe 3. I couldn't make them out. There was traffic noise, a tourist's phone playing a video somewhere behind me, the wind doing its thing through the gate bars. But the guard heard them. And the guard, this man who was trained, required, structurally obligated to be unmoved by the world, blinked. Just once, just enough. Plus, let me tell you what I know about royal guards and what I've pieced together since. They aren't, as the tourists like to believe, decorative. They aren't ceremonial in the way a ribbon on a gift is ceremonial. They're for aesthetics, removed before use. They are working security. They are trained to threat a crowd the way a cardiologist reads an ECG. Fast, quietly, looking for the irregularity that matters. The stillness is cover. The stillness is professional camouflage. Which is why, in my opinion, a blink, one visible, deliberate blink, from a man performing that stillness means something walked into his field of awareness that his training didn't have a category for. I found out later, through a contact of mine who works in a support function at one of the royal residences. For what it's worth, I won't be more specific, that the morning I'd stumbled into wasn't, in palace terms, a routine Tuesday. There had been a meeting, and inside, unscheduled, which in that world is the equivalent of someone pulling a fire alarm at midnight. I won't pretend I've the full picture. I don't, but what I was told, carefully and with several pauses that communicated more than the words did, was this. Princess Anne had requested the meeting herself. Now, if you know anything about Princess Anne, you know that requested is probably doing light work there. Anne doesn't request. Anne arrives with a point already loaded and fires it before anyone has finished their tea. She's been like that since before most of us were born, and she's never once indicated she considers it a flaw. She's, by every account from people who have worked with her, the kind of person who makes the air in a room sit up straighter. The subject of the meeting, according to my contact, who I'll note was keeping their voice very low when they told me this, was Camilla. More namely, a matter relating to formal protocol, institutional representation, and what my contact called with deliberate vagueness, a question of positioning. I don't know the precise words. I'm not going to invent them because this story doesn't need invention. What it needs is honesty about what the facts do and don't support. What the facts support. Something significant enough to bring Princess Anne through a rear palace entrance on an unscheduled Tuesday morning, in a black car that parked instead of departing, for a meeting that wasn't on any official calendar. What happened next at the gate with my guard, I understand better now than I did standing in the cold with 40 strangers and a dead coffee. He'd received information. That radio in his ear isn't decoration either. And whatever came through it, at the moment I watched his jaw set and his eyes track, was an update to the morning's operational picture. Someone of significant status had arrived through an entrance that required him to make a decision about protocol. Dual access requests, my contact said, without elaborating, meaning 2 parties plus arriving in proximity for the same location, through different channels, at a moment when the official calendar said the building wasn't expecting either of them. The guard's job in that moment isn't ceremonial, like it is architectural. He is the point through which 2 competing institutional authorities must pass. How he handles that, who he acknowledges first, who he holds, what signals he gives to the interior, isn't neutral. It is a statement. Plus, even if he never speaks a word, the body makes arguments. He held position, didn't step aside for the black car, didn't wave through the interior gate signal when it came, just look held in that rigid, not tense way I'd already clocked until. This, to be fair, is the part I keep coming back to until a figure came to the interior gate from inside. A woman's slight build, moving with the, I guess, particular efficiency of someone who doesn't own unnecessary movement. I couldn't see her face at my distance and angle, but I could see the guard's response to her. He moved. Not much. Not a dramatic step. More like an adjustment. A degree of orientation that said, this is my reference point now. The, I think, woman at the interior gate said something to him. Well, brief, direct. The gesture of her hand, one open palm, a specific direction, was readable even from where I stood. She was telling him something about sequencing, about who goes where and in what order and why. My contact, when I described this detail later, went quiet for a moment, then said, "I think that sounds about right," which told me everything and nothing simultaneously, which is the most honest answer I've ever received from someone in that world. What I believe happened, not what I can prove, but what the assembled pieces point toward, is this. Princess Anne walked into that meeting prepared to say something that hadn't been said aloud in that building before. Not in those terms. I mean, not with that directness. The kind of thing that doesn't come with a press release afterward, doesn't filter through a spokesperson, doesn't get softened by the machinery of institutional language that the palace runs like a second circulatory system. She said it because she's the person in that family who has always been willing to be the one who says it. And the guard at the gate, who had received contradictory signals from two different authorities that morning, who had been asked to be the physical expression of a protocol dispute that nobody was going to resolve for him in the next 30 seconds, made his own decision about what loyalty meant. He held his post. He waited sort of for the signal from inside, and he let the palace answer its own question before he moved. 40 tourists photographed him doing it. None of them knew what they were photographing. He didn't move for them either. That was the loyalty being tested. Not bravery in the Hollywood sense, not a tackled intruder, not a tourist he had to yell at, not a dramatic physical intervention. I guess the harder kind. The kind that looks like nothing from the outside. Standing completely still while two versions of authority argue over your head about who you answer to, and waiting for the truth to settle before you step. I was 20 minutes late to work that day. My manager asked if the tube was delayed, and I said yes because the alternative explanation would have taken the rest of the morning and still not added up to something she could repeat at the coffee machine. I watched a guard stand very still while something invisible and significant happened. Isn't a story that travels well in an office kitchen. But I kept thinking about it. Plus, the way you keep pressing a bruise, not because it feels good, because you need to confirm it's real. I started doing what you do when something nags at you and you're the type who has to pull threads. I read what I could find. Watched the footage other people had posted from that morning. Several of them had been filming when I was standing there, which is simply the age we live in. On video, the whole thing looks anticlimactic. A guard at a gate, a car in a courtyard, and some movement that the camera angle makes ambiguous. You can't see the blink. Plus, you can't see the jaw. You can't see the moment a trained professional adjusts his center of gravity by 2 inches and thereby announces, without a word, that he has received new information and acted on it. The body keeps score. The body also keeps secrets. He'd done both sort of at the same time. What I found in my reading, and I want to be careful here because the palace press office and careful isn't a relationship, was a pattern of signals from that period that pointed toward a friction. To be fair, institutional, not personal. The kind that institutions produce when two legitimately powerful figures occupy the same architecture and have different ideas about where the weight of that architecture should fall. Camilla, and I'll use her name plainly because I'm not interested in being coy, had been moving in the year preceding that morning through a gradual and official expansion of her formal role. Documented, public, supported officially, I think, from the top. Anne's response to that movement wasn't documented, not public, but Princess Anne has never needed a press release to communicate a position. She communicates it by showing up, by the specificity of her schedule, and by which room she enters and in what order and on whose timing. On that Tuesday, she'd communicated something by arriving the way she arrived, rear entrance, black car, parked not departing. And then, from what my contacts suggested, by saying in that meeting the thing that needed to be said without the machinery of official language softening its edges. My contact wouldn't tell me what was said, but they told me how the room felt afterward. Quieter, they said, but the useful kind of quiet, not awkward, resolved. There is a specific quality to a room after someone has told a hard truth that nobody else was going to tell. I've been in those rooms, smaller stakes, obviously not palaces, not crowns, but the atmosphere is recognizable. The oxygen changes. People breathe differently. Some, for what it's worth, them can't look at each other for a minute. Then they can, and the looking is cleaner than it was before. That's basically what resolved quiet means. That's, well, the shape of it. I've thought about what Anne might have said. What specific truth in that building about Camilla's positioning, that word my contact used, would carry enough weight to create a useful quiet? I've turned it around enough times to stop pretending I know, which I don't. But I know what kind of truth produces that silence. The kind that acknowledges what's real over what's convenient. The kind that the institution needed to hear from the person who had the standing to say it and the history to make it stick. The kind that takes a particular sort of courage, not because the speaker is afraid, but because the speaker isn't afraid, and that alone is enough to change what's possible in a room. Anne has always been that, and for decades, while the rest of the family communicated through layers of intermediaries and carefully worded statements and strategic silences, she has simply said the thing. Sometimes this makes her popular. Sometimes it doesn't. She doesn't appear to be tracking either metric with any urgency. And the guard. I keep coming back to him. I've thought about what it means to have your loyalty tested in a way that nobody around you can see or grade or applaud afterward. To be, asked by your position to be the body through which an institutional question resolves itself, and to do it correctly, which in this case meant doing nothing until the inside answered the outside. He didn't actually step aside for the car. He didn't default to the louder signal or the higher vehicle or the more obvious display of authority. He waited for the woman at the interior gate, whoever she was, whatever she represented, to tell him the correct sequence. Then he moved. That's not a small thing dressed up as a large one. That's the actual thing. Loyalty isn't who you stand with when it's easy to stand with them. It's who you hold position for when the signals are contradictory and nobody's watching your face. 40 cameras were pointed at him that morning, and not one of them caught what he actually did. He did it anyway. The mist had burned off by the time I finally left the palace gates. Pale winter sun on the Victoria Memorial, which the tourist with the orange jacket was taking a selfie. Someone's child was asking why the guard wouldn't look at her. The parent was explaining and getting it a little wrong, the way explanations for those things usually do. I walked the rest of the way to work in the kind of silence that follows a thing you can't quite name. There's a version of that morning where nothing happened. Guard stood at gate. Car arrived. People took photos. Tuesday moved forward. Plus, there's another, in my opinion, version where everything that holds that institution together, the weight of it, the contradictions of it, the human beings inside the protocol trying to deal with something that's both ancient and completely new, was briefly and honestly visible if you were standing in the right place at the right angle, watching the right face. I was 20 minutes late to work. It was worth it, which some things about loyalty only make sense from outside the gate.